This meeting is being recorded.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Maya. So I'm going to formally start the session now by saying it is now 1 minute past 2. Sorry, it's now one minute past 2, and welcome to this session on fermenting feminisms. Sorry. Remembering what the session name is, Fermenting Feminisms for Mother-ness. The time is now 1 minute past 2 in London. The time is now. We are a research collective, and this is a protective, anti-discrimination space of mutual respect that should cause no harm and aims for good. We are recording this session for further experimental research. We respect research protocols. And we are a group of students from around UL, group of research students. We, in this space, which is nominally called The Conversation, an environment where we get together from time to time to discuss various texts and other matters pertaining to the things that are going on in our lives and work and beings and non-beings and other beings and otherness and sameness and difference and so on and so forth. And the notion of this session today is to invite anybody who would like to come and join this conversation to be part of it. So I think most of us who are part of this collective will have our cameras on. Anybody else who would like to join us is very welcome to have their cameras on, or not, as the case may be. We will use the chat. Anybody else who is part of this conversation is very welcome to use the chat or the microphones, or not, as the case may be. This is absolutely an open space for I haven't got my camera on. That's good, isn't it? This is an open space for discussion, and we're going to be talking around one of the texts that we've been kind of thinking about recently, but the likelihood is that the conversation will range around all over the place. I'm also going to say that throughout this discussion, one of our number, Maya, is on, what should we call it, Maya? Digital imaging duty. Maya will be VJing the session. So she will, Maya's practice is, and I'm supposed to prepare this and I clearly haven't, but Maya's practice is using, what should we say, internet-based, mobile phone, I think, largely based apps. Such as those found on many social media type platforms, to process images that she finds in her work and research and life, in order to generate artworks, which the research is interleaves into the research, into her practice-based research. And as we get going with this session, so Maya will be taking the visuals that are produced in and around the room, and anything else that we kind of care to drop into the chat or wherever else, plus her own library, her own archive library of visual information to generate a visual response to the rather wordy, perhaps, discussion that we may or may not be having. We've just come from a fascinating session where Linda and Anna were showing us the knots, the art of knot crocheting with a K in it. And Linda, I think you've got. I think you will probably continue to not crochet as we go.
Piece.
Different piece.
Yes,
I thought you just got very, very busy in the last 2 minutes.
No, whilst we talk, I will continue.
Fabulous. And you know, anybody who is kind of coming into this room should feel very welcome to you know, to work or draw or and you know, anything that you care to contribute can be dropped into the chat. As I say, this is an open and participatory space for general discussion. and we are, you know, we have conversation, but we think that the conversation is useful and interesting conversation that is designed to further our collective and individual thinking / research / learning, and you know, hopefully what comes out of this will go into different directions. Do we want to introduce ourselves, or should we just kind of get on with it? What do you think, people? What's the feeling?
I'd say just start. Yeah,
Just start.
talking about it.
Just start. Yeah, absolutely. It's a funny one because we've got kind of 50 minutes to talk, which is considerably less time than we usually take up on a conversation. Although, of course, you know, the conversation goes in different directions in cyberspace. But crikey, there should be a link to the paper that we're talking about. Can I? Why not? No, actually, I can't share the screen, can I? Can I? I can't. No, I can't share the screen. Can I drop it into the chat? That should be possible, right? Should be, shouldn't it? Oh, now I need Louise to tell me how to be clever and drop the document into the chat. How do I do it, Louise?
Well, just drag it and drop it, no?
Well, I would have thought so, right? Oh, there we go.
There you
Fantastic.
go. No?
Hey.
There you go.
Terrific. Excellent. So this is the paper that we're kind of talking around, which somebody suggested. I think Linda suggested it, and we think it's, well, it seems to be a really interesting consideration in terms of the larger 24 hours on Earth event. You know, this notion of fermenting feminism, and considerations of what it is to be actively engaged in that process of fermentation, of you know, thinking about how we can I don't know, affect change using what we have around us. That's sort of where I would kind of start with it. That notion of wanting to do something, of being aware that there are other agencies and other active constituents in the universe, perhaps non-human ones, that impact on our life, the impact on our lives that we can kind of bring into considerations of making and feeding off one another and environments, and promoting growth and change, and celebrating difference. And yeah, it seemed like a really good place to begin. I wonder. Yeah, I mean, you know what, I will witter. So please interrupt me. Were there any kind of bits in the paper that stood out for anybody in particular as being good places to start, perhaps?
Well, if I can start, only because I didn't really know where the text was going on or anything about it. It's not really related to what I do, but it mentioned some amazing bits in it, and I'll tell you what I mean. It talks about in page 105, it talks about healing, a space for healing. So there's not a result, you know, that people are sick or well, you know, so failure or success, you know, that kind of thing. It's the space in between. This is what the fermenting business is about. Suddenly I get it, you know, I've got something to get into the text. And there's a bit where it says, it also makes a space for conceptions of livability. They exist in the liminal spaces between being sick and being well, or being a so-called success versus being a failure. Successfully overcoming an illness versus failing to heal. Successfully recovering from an addiction versus failing to get sober and stay sober, and so on. So it's about harm reduction frameworks that are informed by an ethos of fermentation and feminism, can shake up tendencies towards an all or nothing thinking, shifting discourses away from healing toward considering individual and collective actions in terms of reducing harm, both to oneself and to others. And I thought, that's quite incredible. So it took it in a direction that I got no idea, you know, that we were going to get there. And it's talking about later on in the paper how just to make people's lives better as they go on these journeys. So I thought, if someone wants to pick up on that, and did anyone else get anything from that part of the text, or did they not see that as relevant to them? That's what it echoed in me.
I thought that was really interesting because I thought that she was talking about, it was the process that she was, when in all of those examples of fermentation, she was concentrating on the process, acknowledging that there was something that was going in right at the beginning. But
Alexa, Simon
but
says
it was,
no.
Sorry, 2 seconds. Meg, you've got your mic on.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. Hey, Jack.
I'm trying to make him behave.
Go on, Linda.
well, I think it was just making me think, or she made me think much more. And I think this is what she's trying to do within her writing generally, is to make people think through processes rather than think about sort of like, it's not A to B thinking. It's this piece in, it's like, you know, it's like the space in between that is connected. It's the conduit that she's interested in.
Yeah, and can I just bring that back to your last hour that we've just done? That seems really poignant now. You know, this space in between of thinking through the making process, which you've just done. You've just linked it from 0 to 1 hour through making. And it seems to me that's what it's talking about in the text. And that seems to be what you've picked up on, that process, the process thinking, as it were.
Yes, and that it is, it's kind of like all, it is there, but it's not visible. It's something that it's not immediately, it's not written, although she obviously writes it to transfer or that information to us, but it's what it makes you think. It's like she was talking about people who were going through therapy for alcohol or drug addiction or homelessness, how you don't necessarily, how if you go into that situation and you want to see resolve as in positive results, you're not always going to see what people consider as positive results. You might see something different, and because it's different doesn't mean that it's the wrong result. It's something that is another, it's like another way of thinking or another dimension. And I think that that is what I'm getting from this sort of like the thinking that we're doing today, is that it's not traditional kind of like binary thinking, and trying to get you to think using different parts of your brain, perhaps, or your hands, thinking through making.
Yeah, and she's focusing on the in between, isn't she? So it's not the beginning or the end. There's somewhere in the middle, this fermenting process where something's happening.
Yeah,
wherever it goes. Yeah.
And I think it was also really interesting when she was talking about, she was making, she went to a session where she was making or learning how to make, I don't know, a fermented liquid, a fermented drink.
Kombucha.
And how, sorry?
Kombucha.
Yeah, and sorry, kombucha, and it was kind of like how there were two women there who were really impatient because they wanted it instantly, and they weren't prepared for the process to happen. And and I think that that's quite difficult, or it might be reflective of our sort of now society.
That really stood out for me as well, Linda, that there is that sort of, I really don't have time for this. This is, what am I doing here? I've come here for a result. I've come here to learn to do something, and I want it. And I've paid my money, and I want, therefore I should get my the thing that I go to the store to to buy, pick off the shelf. And actually, that notion of the it takes time. That process of fermentation takes time, and actually we are impatient. We want results. If we're making an investment of time and money, then we want to see a return on that investment sooner rather than later, please. And it strikes me, I mean, all of us are involved in this research process that can go on for years and years and years, and we hopefully get reasonably good at patience over that time. But I certainly feel all sorts of frustration myself, and see all sorts of frustrations around me at the fact that as you were saying about the not really wanting to go the correct route and thinking that there might be another way, that actually mostly we seek out the most direct route to something because we want to get there so that we can move on to the next thing, and maybe, as Graham was saying, increase the difficulty level for the next round so that we kind of get better at something. And actually, for me, the whole research degree process is an exercise in learning to be with patience and uncertainty and prolonged period of time in that not knowing and being unsure and questioning everything pretty much. With a means to what? What is the product? The liminal space on the way to what is it that we're actually going to get as a result? A delicious beverage that will that's a tonic, maybe, but then what does that do? What is the effect of that on ourselves and our systems and our ways of thinking, as you say, but maybe ways of being, maybe a kind of a more holistic sense of being in the world. Sorry, I'm rambling again.
I think I thought what you were just saying there about that kind of almost gamification of skills was quite interesting, where you're kind of in a position of leveling up all the time. And yeah, I think that's quite an interesting thing that she was pulling out about the giving pause now and then. But I also picked up on something else. I found something else really interesting with the language that she used, and it made me think when I was reading it that it goes back to language that I used actually considering myself an academic. So actually, very naturally, the language that I would use if I'm thinking about things is that I'm stewing on it, I'm like digesting it, I'm all those kinds of words which are a little bit more kind of descriptive of an absorption, eaterly process, and that feels very a very natural way of talking about certainly the way I take in information and think about information and change what I'm doing. And so I might read something and then I kind of sit with it for a while and I think about it and then I stew on it, and then something else, I come across something else and that goes in as well, the big pot that is my head. and you know, I'll stew on that for a bit and it gets stirred with something else. And so I really appreciated that language that felt like it was kind of cooking and making, not so much because it kind of links to this idea of what feminine is. It's not about that, but it's just about, it felt like a very natural language before I saw myself in any way as supposed to be performing as an academic. So as soon as you perform as an academic, you use different words. Yeah, exactly. Correct all grammar errors immediately. You know, you make sure you get the precise phrasing. But yeah, that's not what happens. You ferment ideas in your brain, and I really appreciated that about what she wrote. Anyway, I'm rambling now.
I don't think you
No,
are at
no,
all.
Mim, that was great. The way you just distilled it, and I'll excuse the pun, into a very natural way of talking, saying that you stew on things, which is into the natural language, which I like. I liked it better the way you put it in that language than some of the language she was using. It took me ages to get into the text. I was thinking, oh no. You know, it was the number of pages of oh no. But once it got brought down to the level that you just made and highlighted, I thought it was great. Also, she talks about revision. So over time, there is a change. There's a revision of feminist text, she's saying, when you first look at feminism and then revisit the text now, as she was saying, as a PhD student. So she looks at them in a different way. So there's a revision about and what you have to consider and all these other adjustments. Once again, there's a stewing on this, you know, and there's it has to be simmered down, as it were, you know, to the basics. And that's really, it's a very useful way of looking at things.
It's a very human way of looking at things, isn't it?
Yeah, but it also brought in lots of really contentious issues, you know, which are current, you know, that in how this thinking that she's highlighting through making, because that's what she's doing, she's making things, they're all making, and she's bringing all sorts of issues that are topical.
I found it quite interesting that she is looking at other makers and in a sort of like a artistic, a sort of like from an arts background, but also there's something I'm just thinking that she's actually making, as in she is making fermenting stuff. She is into her sourdough, and she is allowing that to grow. And she said, as she was in the process of her PhD, that she had time to have community with this sourdough, and that she could allow that process to happen. And I think that perhaps that is something that we have as doing PhD. You have that opportunity to let things ferment. And also she was talking about the soap with the grit in it. And I think that if you're in community, you're then able, there are other pieces of grit that enter into your soap. And
yeah, I really like that actually as well, Linda. Yeah, the addition of things that come in. And I thought that kind of analogy with the making of the dough, when a few years ago, when my kids were still in primary school, everybody in my local area got into this, and I don't even know what it's called. It's like a cake base that you kind of, yeast-based cake base that you kind of, you grew it a bit in your house, and then you took 3/4 of it and you had to pass on the other quarter to somebody else. And in the meantime, you were kneading it. So, you know, your own skin cells were going into it, and you know, everything from your house was going into it, and then you would share it with somebody else. And it was just, there was some, and everybody did it. It was really weird the way the whole community got involved in this sharing of whatever this type of cake was called. and it did bring everybody together. This was like pre-lockdown. This was a long time ago. I thought it was quite interesting, but it does exactly that. It takes everything from the context, everything from your environment, the kind of grit of your environment, as you're talking about, and adds it, you know.
Yeah, it would be interesting to do sort of like some analysis of the cake at the end of the at the end of the experiment, to see actually what is in it and what wasn't in it at what the ingredients were in the beginning.
Absolutely. But I mean, because none of us thought about the fact that, you know, the smells of your house are going into it, the bits, you know, bits from your fingers, because obviously you've got clean hands when you're doing stuff with it. But that's a natural part of it, isn't it? It's a natural part that actually whatever you're making takes on the environment that it's in. I mean, I know I'm bound to think that because that's what all my work's about, but it's bound to, for me, it's bound to take on that aspect. And you know, she's talking very much about those kind of material processes and the kind of context that goes into all those materials that you use. I thought that was quite interesting.
And so, I mean, sorry, Linda.
No, I was just so sorry. I was just from him. Just your space is also material.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, that's all I have to say.
But I think you're right, and that's exactly what she's saying.
Yeah, that is a very practical problem for me. I'm painting pictures at the moment, and if you've ever painted small paintings in your bedroom or where you live, and you use varnish, you know, you use glazing, it's like a magnet for anything that could possibly stick to it. So any dust, hair, anything like that, you think you've got it clean, and when it dries, there it all is, stuck in it. You cannot avoid it. So that is a perfect illustration of, in practical sense, of what you're saying in relation to the cake basing, and Linda, what you're saying about the space being us. Yeah, we can't avoid it. I agree.
So on that, I mean, how much do you think that our environments do impact or infect our work? You know, is all work, and I'm talking about a painting or a cake or a net or a pedagogic session or a workshop or an exercise or a meeting or a piece of writing or you know, any practical output. Is it inevitable that what is going on around it will feed into it, will affect it?
Well, I've discussed with a number of people about not millions, but a few, and they've said they were having trouble with their PhD and still they embraced all the issues in their life within the PhD. And then suddenly it started to make sense. So rather than pushing it away, they gathered it in, embraced it, worked with it, which goes with our theme. So suddenly it became part of the process, and then they're able to move through, or they may not all be finished with the process, but the process is carrying on. So they're able to work with it better. So rather than trying to escape your situation, you work with the situation, and that becomes part of the research. And it certainly did for me. You know, once I acknowledged that, and then that became part of it, then I was working through it, working with it and working through it.
PhD as catharsis.
I don't know about catharsis, but it was certainly, it's a working through process, you know, so maybe, yeah, a continual thing, you know, because we don't solve everything, do we? We just work with certain parts. Yeah.
Perhaps it can be catalyst as well.
Yeah. And also something like a PhD is a frame for a certain period of time for what you're doing. So it's not like I never did this before, and it's not like I'll never do this again, but the PhD was a framework for a certain time. So it provided a frame for the actions, artworks, thinking, etc. And also it generated them as well.
But it's
So
a
it
piece
doesn't
of
stop.
it's a piece of work, right?
Yes.
Yeah, a piece of work that goes on, and therefore the things that are going on around it are going to feed into it. But is it therefore a good analogy for any other piece of work that we do? I mean, albeit this a larger one, but you know, because it is what we're doing, we do become a little bit obsessed with it. I think it is the you know, a thing to hang everything else on. But you know, can we see this research project as analogous of other things that we might do, from baking a cake to you know, building a house or writing a workshop or you know, engaging in a relationship, piece of work?
But I think that the whole thing that we're sort of like focusing on, the fermenting process, it's enabling things to ferment within a process, you know. So it is everyday living, but it's also the rest of the things that technology, etc., that you can't escape, and therefore do you have to embrace.
I mean, I think we're constantly learning from everything that we read, like the fermentation process. We're constantly learning, we're constantly changing. And she talks about this being part of a kind of changing process as well, in which everything is transforming all the time. And kind of going back to what Gavin was saying, you know, everything that we bring in becomes part of the work, and it's inevitable, because we have situated knowledge. You know, we are there present in as much as we are ever an I, as much as we are ever a subject. We are there, you know, absorbing all of this stuff and making stuff. I mean, it feels particularly pertinent to you actually, John, with thoughts about you know, a block, a creative block about things, but you're inevitably making material out of that block that you have, which is you in that situation, you know. So I think it's actually as a piece of text, it has insight into the process going forward, but also how we just live you know, every day.
And I think that that's what I find refreshing about her writing, is that she she does embrace what's happening around her much more, not on a level of taking academic texts and analyzing them, although she does that, but she also looks at what everyone is facing, looking at, and trying to understand.
Do you mean by different communities, etc., that she mentions? Is that what you mean, Linda?
She's very situated in her research. You know, she inhabits it. And I think that is that's a very positive thing for me. That's what I feel from her writing, is that she is auto theory, but also it's sort of like, this is where I live. I'm not pretending that she's not in an ivory tower. She is there on the ground. And to even and it literally talking about fermenting, which obviously makes you think of composting and things like that. But she's sort of really, yeah, it's just there's a hands-on feeling about it, even though she's writing or while she's writing.
It's funny, the text, it's when you speak about these texts or talk about them a little, it's always better. You know, any text we've talked about in any of the groups we're all in, suddenly they come alive for me. There's a spark with reading them. And then other people's opinions bring it alive. And they link the whole thing together. You know, I have difficulty linking all the pages together. You know, but I've only read it once, so that's why, you know, I find it a bit of a task. But I think once people start talking about these texts and they bring out their little bits that associate to them, then I get more from it. And it brought up this idea of wellness and the idea of helping people in between. And so the idea of making people's lives better. I thought that was that wasn't something I was expecting from a text talking about fermentation and feminism. And I thought that was lovely. I thought it was, that's real caring. You know, that was a journey. You know, it was the journey between sickness and health. And you may not get there, as it were. But we're going to make it better. That's what that really shone for me. I mentioned it before, but more and more, I think.
But you have to care when you ferment, don't you?
Yeah.
Because you can't leave a sourdough and just shove it in the corner and expect it to do its stuff. You've got to look after it. Even just the temperature, and you know, there's that sort of, I guess it's sort of,
it encourages nurture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and I see what you mean. It's a way of starting something small that makes you think about things in a different way through a practical means. So
Yes.
she's saying that anyone can get on with this, that you don't have to be rich or anything. You don't have to have specific equipment. She's saying like you only need a jar for some things, you know, like, and then the natural elements will do the rest, etc., etc. So it was not about money or status or anything like that. And so it's to encourage this kind of nurturing through a small act, a simple act. And then it engages with nature, I think. And then that brings us to maybe thinking about to other humans as well, as she does.
Or just relationship, you know, the relationship between self and other, be that human or non-human or environment or work. This is a, you know, as we're kind of talking about, this is process. This is a kind of an ongoing negotiation, which is not a given. That, you know, care must be paid to the conditions and to, you know, the way that what we are working with is or operates or is experiencing, and how that is also shifting, you know, and that, you know, there's a lot at the beginning of the paper about, and Linda, you're much better qualified to talk about this, you know, sort of vibrant matter, vital matter, you know, the sort of the liveliness in things which are you know, not perhaps not seen as requiring care or nurture, but actually it's this awareness of, you know, the whole raft of environmental concerns that actually, you know, to kind of come back to the themes that we're talking about in the kind of the larger event, I think are phenomenally important. You know, this learning to notice, this wanting to do something, but being aware that we can't just have things immediately, that actually we do have to be thinking about and questioning and you know, getting into a relationship with that which we are attempting to work with.
Yeah, she
I
does.
like- Sorry, go ahead, Gavin.
No, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I like how the care here is also genuine care. Well, you know, when we read Heidegger and he talks about care, I always feel like he's got a very different idea of what care is than like maybe the rest of us do. This does feel like proper care, you know. It might be, yes, it might be for a sourdough, but it's exactly as Linda says. You can't just wander off and leave it alone. It needs nurturing, you know. It's
Then
yeah.
what does Heidegger say about care? Because I don't know.
Well, it's more. He thinks that we approach the world. The natural state of humans is to approach the world and the things within the world through care. But it's not care as you know it. It's a more like an
Like
attention.
noticing or something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's more
Like-
like an attention to things and a wanting to be authentic with them. And that issue around authenticity and place and how you're authentic with things was kind of, you know, for me, obviously from lots of people, that kind of led to the downfall of Heidegger's thinking, because when you're that obsessed with authenticity and how you behave about something, that's when you lead to kind of supremacist thinking. So, you know, you can see it's based in this very strange idea of care, whereas this is a real idea of care, you know, care for your kitten, care for your house, care for your sourdough, care for anything you actually care about, where you give it time and you, yes, you give it attention, but it's not about giving it authentic attention. It's
touch.
It's about giving loving attention and touch, yeah. And being
Also-
there, giving it time.
Also, there's a self-awareness. And in the text, she talks about how when she gets impatient with the women who are getting impatient in the group, and she says, I realize I'm becoming impatient with them for being impatient. So she's aware of herself and checking herself as well. So that was good. I really liked that. That was a reflection which struck me.
I also liked, I mean, she also talked about, and this is something I notice very much when I'm teaching, actually, or when I'm talking to my kids. She spoke about on page 95, fermentation being an aspect of accessibility. And you picked up on it earlier as well, Gavin, that idea that spaces aren't sterile and things become digestible. So she had it with these two separate areas. That the space itself isn't sterile space. You can do it with you can do things with basic tools, and you don't need like laboratory conditions to find things out, to ferment something. And also you can render the undigestible digestible for others. And this just struck me very much about, this is like me teaching my students, you know, I read stuff and then I kind of render it digestible for them in some
So
way.
is that like birds, like pre-chewing the food?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's exactly like that though. I mean, don't you all find those that teach in the room, that you find that you're kind of getting these quite complex ideas and you're rendering them digestible to them, or sometimes taking their ideas and making them you know, digestible for the rest of the class. So you're quite often in this position of like fermenting things to make things accessible for others. And you're also saying you can do your study or your practice or whatever it is here, right here in the space that we're in. You don't need to go to a lab in Cambridge. You can think these things now. And so I thought that was really interesting, that idea of accessibility, actually.
Because we're talking about, I mean, big issues here. We're talking about things that are world problems, world altering problems that we are, kind of trying to kind of kick around. And actually, we've talked about the language of this paper being, having different resonances for us than some of the kind of the more ivory tower stuff. That does kind of become a little bit inaccessible. How much should we be attempting to do that? How much should we be attempting to pre-digest in order to allow people access? Or does it kind of come back to this thing of presenting difficult ideas and allowing the space for them to be taken apart and kicked about? Do we want everything in bite-sized morsels that we can just consume? Or is there value in having to chew over something and to attempt to access it in different ways? This is a very open question, because I'm really unsure. I think, Mim, I would absolutely be seeking nice, clear, concise ways to present things to give people ways in, but I'm really wary of trying to get anybody to think like I do, because that's really dangerous, right?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I think, yeah, but it's like, comes back to that baby bird analogy, doesn't it? You kind of slightly pre-chewed it, but at the end of the day, they've got to do the rest of the chewing themselves. You're just making it accessible.
Maybe it doesn't mean like being like concise or something. I don't know. Maybe it's like finding different metaphors could also mean like being accessible. So like I have to explain this thing about the carving direction, and I still don't have enough metaphors in my pocket, but one of them is like, it's like a circle of the wood, and then it's not really like this. I usually have a piece of tape, not a circle. And then you have to like explain the direction of the wood as water dripping down, and the water drips down like this part of the circle, it gets to this point, and then the water would just like drip away. And that kind of works for some people, but then it makes more sense for other people to put like a light on the tape, and then you can see the shadow on one side and the light on the other side, and like, yeah. So I don't think, maybe it's not about making difficult ideas simpler, but more about like reconfiguring them into the language that other people speak, maybe.
Or languages.
Well, I think we've already done it with the bird analogy. I think that's a perfect example. That's a perfect example of that, talking about things in a metaphor that we can all understand.
Yeah.
Which doesn't, I don't see anyone twisting that metaphor for evil ends. I think that's probably that's why Big Bird works so well on. Anyway, I want to bring something up John said to do with issues at the beginning of the text that are worldwide. And there's lots of them in there, by the way. But I'm highlighting one because it's about landfill. She talks about landfill. She said, so we put all the rubbish in the bin to do with fermentation, and then it goes off to landfill, and we think fine. But of course, no, because everything's fermenting underground and causing all these things going on, which will be surface in many years' time. I mean, that says all sorts. That says about trauma. It says about all sorts. It can be taken off into different ways. But I thought that's quite a kind of real way of thinking about this in real terms that we can understand. Fermenting, how what we bury now is going to turn into something else what we're not sure of at another time in a different place. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and that's not in a good way. Sorry, Linda, go.
No, just that it's terrifying that, you know, that we bury stuff and we don't know how it's going to react with the microorganisms that are already in the soil there. I guess methane is the obvious example that we know the results of, but you know, I'm sure there's many more horrible things happening when we're putting various oil, petrol-based polymers into the ground. Sorry, I haven't got anything positive to say about that one.
No, yeah, that's exactly the tone you should have with it. That's the correct tone that goes with it, I think. Yeah, what's going to happen? Exactly. So that's why this generation are looking at us, these younger generations are looking at us and said, look what you've done. You know,
Yeah,
that's why it's an emergency. Yeah.
that we can't even see yet. Look what you've done that we can't see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we've done just that. We've buried it.
Yeah, we've buried it. Yeah.
We literally can't see it.
Yeah, and when it comes up again, you know, then suddenly they're going to have to deal with it, whatever, you know.
These active agents in the earth, which is kind of what this whole thing is about. You know, these seeds that are planted, these microorganisms that exist, and I think that notion of both noticing and remembering that we have the ability to be careful, to act differently, to find different languages perhaps for talking to people, because I'm unconvinced by this notion of I mean, I love the fermentation metaphor. I think it's really interesting, but I think we also have to be slightly careful. I mean, I had another conversation with somebody else about this text, who said that whilst the ideas are, you know, absolutely terrific, the metaphor didn't particularly work for them. That, you know, they found it a little bit off-putting. And I think that, I mean, to my mind, we need to be thinking more about diversifying the platforms or the languages or the ways in which we find to discuss and disseminate and explore, you know, rather than kind of trying to come up with the you know, as Louise guards against, you know, the perfect concise you know, means of making difficult concepts more palatable, or you know, less dangerous to consume, perhaps, like the, you know, cassava root that gets chewed over, or you know, sort of pre-fermented so that it's not poisonous. That we need to kind of think about finding multiple ways, you know, multiple platforms, multiple routes to speak to different people in different ways. You know, for some people, the you know, the dry academic text actually is hugely comforting, and other people will run a mile from it. And I, you know, I think that most of us tend to have different preferences at different times. You know, sometimes I never want to see another text again. Just give me images, or I just want to hear stuff. You know, and I think that to my mind, you know, the more possibilities we can find for sort of shifting things into different arenas, such as Maya's doing with the kind of the conversation and the images here, I think is a lovely way of kind of thinking about that. So I would be probably making a plea to you know, think about what else we can do, other ways of talking about these sorts of issues, which, you know, don't dumb down or make more palatable, because how can you? But just allow, you know, I teach, you know, sort of relatively young students at kind of 18, 19. And I have to say, you know, having done a project on climate change, they're pretty turned off by the sorts of, you know, language that old fogies like me are employing to talk about the damage that's been done to the planet. You know, there need to be other ways to kind of introduce this stuff, kind of more radical ways, more, you know, it's like the different ways of you know, urban guerrilla knitting or crocheting or planting. You know, we need to sow other seeds. I don't want to finish this with me talking, but I'm quite aware that we are going to have to wrap this up because we need to close down this platform so that somebody else can get onto this platform. So somebody else take over and come to a nice, neat conclusion rather than me having the last word. Because
Do you want to just say what text we've been looking at again?
Yeah, indeed. It's a text by Lauren Fournier. It's called Fermenting Feminism as Methodology and Metaphor, approaching transnational feminist practices through microbial transformation. There's a mouthful. It's actually much easier to read than it is to speak.
I'm glad I made you say it.
Thanks, Linda. So actually, I think I probably will have the last word, won't I? Thank you, everybody, for taking part in this conversation. As ever, we've kind of got started. It's just getting interesting, and now we have to move somewhere else. But the next session is going to be somewhere else. Says he, desperately looking for it. I can't find it. The next session is going to be. Somebody help me out, please. Sorry, I've got it now. The next session is going to be on this platform, on Zoom, and it's Andrea's art class, which is going to be shared on this platform. Very briefly.
Can we just stay on?
No, we need to come out so that the next person can start the session. So thank you all for being part of this. It's been fun and mad, and the conversation will continue, and we will be finding different ways to disseminate. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for those who watch in retrospect. We will get somewhere eventually, maybe, possibly, or maybe we'll just stay on the in-between.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Yep. Thank you.